We're taking a look at anger this morning from the book of Proverbs, controlling anger. And so I just looking at, I know some of you don't have a booklet, but I can't find any more. So at any rate. So we'll look at a number of Proverbs that talk about anger and controlling anger. One of the really important principles in Scripture, you might remember that in Galatians 5 and verse 19 through 21, the Apostle Paul talks about the works of the flesh, which are obvious. And as we read those, we often think about the first few and the last few. First few, sexual sins. The last few, murder and stuff like that. And we don't care about the middle. But the middle talks about anger, an outburst of wrath, and things like that, which, he said, those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, this is a pretty important subject that we maintain this. Everybody has weapons of anger. Obviously, anger itself is an emotion that God has given us. Ephesians chapter 4, he says, "Be angry, but do not sin, and do not let the sun go down on your wrath." Therefore, anger is oftentimes a natural reaction to our sense of right and wrong. Jesus himself in Mark chapter 3, verse 5, looked around on the Pharisees with anger because he was grieved with their hardness of heart. But our problem is we use a weapon, and there's a lot of reasons we use these weapons of anger. Most of it is simply to control somebody else so that they do what we think they ought to do, and anger is used as a punishment to another person so that they stop treating us the way they're treating us. I might just add that that is the worst possible way to get somebody to do what you would like them to do. Because if you keep using a weapon, one of your weapons of anger on someone to get them to straighten up, pretty soon they'll just go toodaloo, adios and goodbye and forget you and I don't care and everything else. You cannot remedy a sin by creating your own sin, and it is not up to us. I remember when reading about a counselor who simply said to the person he was trying to help with anger, said, "Who has the right to punish?" Man looked at him and said, "God." He says, "Right, so why are you doing it?" Okay, that brings it home. God is the only one who has the right to punish. We do not have a right to punish somebody else, and anger is a way that we use to punish other people. So these Proverbs are going to be very, very important. Let's start with the first one in Proverbs 10 and verse 12. Proverbs 10 and verse 12. So notice, very simple, real short proverb. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. Obviously, a lot of different applications in some of these very short proverbs. So what are some of the things you would observe from that? The contrasting proverb.
I was thinking about as if it was a fire. So hatred fans the flames, where love extinguishes them.
Okay. Good observation. Good way to look at that. Hatred is something that is going to fan the flames, is going to cause things to get worse, whereas love is going to cover sins. What would be the idea of covering sins? Wait.
You know, anger is a heart problem. Love is a heart solution. And the factor that covers it is a forgiving heart. If you have a forgiving heart, you're probably not going to be angry. And if you have a forgiving heart, you're probably going to, it says if you don't forgive others, your sins aren't going to be forgiven. And how many do you have to have forgiven? A lot. Yeah. So the multitude of sins may be your own.
Yeah.
And when you forgive others, it's a blessing.
Okay, good. So obviously it's not doing us any good to try to use hatred to get somebody else when we have our own sins. Jerry?
I don't think if we looked up the root word of cover that we would see a match with forgiven. But I think, as you're saying, there's a parallel at the beginning of making things worse or making things better.
Good, good. So covering sins goes beyond just forgiving. What else might we say about love covering all sins?
In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, about love, it says that love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. That's how love covers.
Yeah. Good. You're looking for the best in others, and so, well, I mean, look at it this way: how do we handle, how do we handle sins in our own families, as opposed to how we might handle it with a friend or a brother and sister in Christ? I know there's two answers to that. Kathy.
Well, we don't always put it in the newspaper when it's somebody that we are close to and love, but if it's someone that we don't care so much about, we'll tell everybody that we know.
There you go. So there's one thing that is very, very important. You're not publishing it. You're trying to cover it. You're trying to let it go. Why would you cover? What's the real point of covering sins instead of accentuating them? Somebody else here.
Well, we all sin, so I mean, we all need forgiveness. We all need our sins covered.
Okay.
So,
Well, and it goes along with what Chip read. We're hoping the best for somebody. So we give each other a little leeway. Yeah, you fouled up, but as Ecclesiastes says, don't have a fit when you hear your servant cursing you, because you know full well you've cursed others. so don't come apart at the seams on that.
It's kind of like saying, I forgave this guy, but you won't believe what you did.
Yeah.
And you tell him. And it's almost like you want to wear a t-shirt that says what he did, but I forgave him. What you're doing, covering it, is burning the shirt.
Yeah, good. Ken.
I was going to say, another word we could use there is conceals, and works to prevent discord between the two. And it would excuse other people's offenses, and in that way it just covers up the mistake. Conceal
Okay.
doesn't get out, spread.
Good.
By complaining at other people.
Good. So there's a side to this we need to add to that, and that's really good there. When let's take it into, if you're married, take it into your marriage. If you're really just, as I always told my boys, you want to find a woman who's googly-eyed in love with you. I like that term. If she's googly-eyed in love with you and you're googly-eyed in love with her, and you do something wrong, one of you eventually messes up, what happens? Depends on how long you've been married. Well, some point to that.
An act of forgetting, an act of forgetfulness of the wrong that they've made. When I think of covering, you don't see anything beyond it. You don't see what happened before. When you're so close to someone and they sin against you, to hold on to that, that's a sin in itself, right? When it's in
Okay. Yeah. All that's true. I want you to just think naturally here. Not too many people blow a honeymoon. Notice I've known some. I've known some occasionally who blew a honeymoon. Normally you don't blow a honeymoon. Normally it's not the way it works. Give me some stuff, John.
When your reaction is, for maybe somebody that's close to you or in this situation, there's a component of mercy there that you're extending in those situations that you may not extend in other situations. So they're
Okay.
trying to be merciful and not.
Why do we extend more of that space to someone that we really are closely, romantically in love with, Kelly?
You don't want to mess up a good thing.
Yeah, you tend to overlook that because you love them so much, and you've understood when you went into marriage, especially in that honeymoon stage. You've understood. He didn't mean it that much. But if you really hate somebody, if you just got to the point where you can't stand being around them, and every time if somebody just mentions their name, you gnash your teeth and and just can't stand the thought of it, how much does it take for that person to send you off the edge? About that much. You're already at, he or she has already spent all their pocket change, so to speak. My point being, when you concentrate, and I think this is the primary part of this, when you concentrate on loving someone, as many of you pointed out, as Jesus loves us, forgiving as Jesus forgives us, when you concentrate on love, it is more difficult to hold on to something somebody does. It's easier to overlook. We see it in our marriages. We see it with our children. We see it with friends that we're very close to. All of those things make it easier for us to overlook. But when there are hard feelings, when there's feelings of hatred and things like that, like this, it's just so difficult to be able to overcome a hurt, a harm, a word, a statement. All those things we don't tolerate so easily when we don't have the proper love. Therefore, work on love with everybody. Paul tells us we're to love everybody. And you work on that love based on, as was pointed out, based on God's love for us. You work on that love, and the more you work on that love and see them as a soul that is in need and needs saved just as you are, then it is much easier to cover. But if you allow hatred in your heart, you're going to stir up strife. When somebody whacks at you, you're going to whack right back. And it's exactly what he's warning us. Diffuse is what he's trying to get us to do, and love so that we can cover that. James 5:20 says a similar thing here. Love covers a multitude of sins. All right? Comments any further? All right? Yeah.
It's the principle of God's love with us is that He wants for us to be reconciled with Him.
Good.
So He wants us to be at peace. In the Bible, when you read about peace, praying for peace is between us and God. When we have peace with Him is being forgiven. And so all those principles, when I think of strife in this verse, the opposite of that is a peacemaker.
Yeah.
Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. So the sons of God, people who have a relationship with Him, are peacemakers.
Good. And strife, by the way, is part of that works of the flesh again in Galatians 5. So we're trying to avoid those things. It is such a valuable principle here that we want to make sure we have a good relationship. But Paul said in Romans 12, by the way, about verse 18, he said, live at peace as far as possible with you, live at peace with all men. I most of the time you can make peace with just about anybody. Most of the time, if you have the right attitude. There are occasions in which it doesn't matter what you do; they want to battle. Those things happen. Paul ran into it. Other of those who taught the gospel, Jesus ran into it, etc. If a person is bent on hating you, there's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do about it. But you can diffuse and maintain not building that strife up. Look at Proverbs, the next one, Proverbs 14, verses 16 and 17. By the way, major difference in how New King James translated this and how the NIV translated it, so I'll read both of these for you. First, New King James, a wise man fears and departs from evil, but a fool rages and is self-confident. A quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man of wicked intentions is hated. Or NIV says, the wise fear the Lord and shun evil, but a fool is hot-headed and yet feels secure. A quick-tempered person does foolish things, and the one who devises evil schemes is hated. So, what are some of the observations you have there? A lot of interesting things. You might notice, I think there's 4 different kinds of people in these 2 Proverbs that you might identify. Observations.
Thought about what, in contrast to the full-tempered man of wicked intention, what would the wise look like in contrast to that? And that it would be restrained, self-controlled, and aware of what's going around them.
Good. The wise has an awareness of where this is going. I heard, I think it was Tim Keller, in one of his lessons recently, talked about, or at least recently when I heard it, but talked about that once someone's voice starts to raise, once it gets to that point in any kind of discussion, you might as well stop. Because you cannot win any kind of discussion, or you cannot come to a rational conclusion when one of the 2 people are getting upset. So you might as well just stop. Let it go for a while. Great, by the way, message in a marriage. Teresa, when we first got married, she scared me because I wanted to talk something out, and she says, I just can't talk about it right now. I said, well, we need to talk this out. You know, we don't want to brush it under the carpet. She says, I can't talk about it right now. Please walk away. And I'm like, oh my, what are we going to do? We need to talk this out. We need to come to a conclusion. So in a few minutes, she came to me and says, look, you understand something. You can out-talk me 10-1. I can't think that fast and I can't talk that fast. So here's the deal. I need to walk away, think it through so that I don't say something dumb and something out of anger, and I need to think it through. You may be right, but I've got to think about it for a while. I promise we'll talk about it, but give me some space and do it. And I went, oh, okay, that's all I needed to know. I was scared we were going to, just brush it under the carpet, and that has helped. That helped our marriage the whole rest of the time. I know she'll always talk it out, but I know she's like, whoa, we can't, I got to think. Jerry.
It's very fruitless to be rational to someone who's being irrational, but it does not help to tell them they're being irrational.
Yeah, that's right. You saying that by experience, or maybe? Yeah, no kidding. That's so true. So anyway, yeah. By the way, I think one of the interesting things that I read a book on anger a number of years ago because I was dealing with it myself, and one of the interesting things that I discovered is that when you are angry, the blood vessels in the frontal lobe of your brain constrict and pretty well shut off that frontal lobe. And the reason of course it does it, and the frontal lobe happens to be that reasoning part, that part that gives you the ability to say no to things, to stop, etc. And so when you're really angry, that just shuts down. By the way, it's the same blood vessels that shut down if you are inebriated. and by some kind of drug. And it just shuts down. That's why somebody who's drunk acts like a crazy person. They got no sense. They all inhibitions just leave them because they're not using the frontal lobe of their brain. So be aware. And by the way, it's addictive. Though the chemicals that are let loose in anger are addictive, so that there's a tendency when you run into the situation again, you're going to even more easily fall into the anger weapon that you're using because you feel some relief by letting off steam. Ever heard somebody say that? Well, sometimes you just got to let off some steam. Well, when you let off some steam, you burned everybody around you. Oh, when you let off steam, just try it. Boil some water, put your hand over it. Yeah, letting off steam is not a good idea because it hurts everybody around you. But that is a tendency of people think, well, it relieves the pressure I'm feeling. Well, you can call it that, but it is still sinful, and you're harming other people, and it's the reason he said not to do it. And that release of those chemicals become addictive, and it's not good for you. So there's a lot of that is involved here with this, and you'll notice that's where this hot-headed man feels self-confident or secure. Nothing wrong with me. It's everybody else. And then you have the next line, the quick-tempered person does foolish things. He's not rational. He's not doing rational things. And a man of wicked intentions is hated. Okay, you put all those things together and you use anger, and what's going to happen? People are going to hate you. You don't want to be around you. They don't even want to relate to you. I had a neighbor once, and the man was just one. We just got along like easy, but she, I don't know, in that old movie, The Wicked Witch of the South or the North or whatever it was, of the West, that's who she was, and I just stay away. We never had a run-in much, but I could tell. Wrong word with her, and she's going to bite your head off. And so I was always, hi, nice to see you this morning. Let me not get too close, lest I die. But it's just that kind of thing. It's unbecoming. Obviously, somebody who's a child of God. Anything else on that? Also, the next one. Proverbs 12, verse 18. Proverbs 12, verse 18. There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, or reckless words are like a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. Okay, what's that tell you about how we speak with anger? That's right.
It's not without effect. What you said is not without effect.
That's exactly right. Our words are very, very powerful. James talks about that in James 3. He talks about your tongue being like a match that can start a huge forest fire. It's piercings of the sword. Probably a lot of times when we're using our words, we may not be thinking how the other person is hearing it. Of course, sometimes we are, and we want to make the point. Again, it's a matter of punishing, piercings of the sword, and causes a person then to rectify what I'm talking about, else you'll get it again. You ever heard somebody say, boy, I'll let him have it? Well, good for you. I don't think that was exactly the way the Lord wanted us to do that. What's something else you notice here?
It's also good to recognize that we can maybe take some of the heat out of the negative words towards us, knowing that they're acting foolishly or doing other things, and not take it to heart, like the kid who lashes out at their parents. He doesn't really mean that. He would say, "I hate you, Dad," or whatever it is. It's not necessarily necessarily.
Yeah, it's an emotion of the moment, maybe. Said at a more rational time, might not be said, diffuse the situation, bring things down, and you're going to have a better chance of getting things the way they ought to be. Remember, anger comes out of our sense of ought being violated. It ought to be, it ought to be, it ought to be. Injustice, it ought to be. And there's going to be a lot of those. As Ecclesiastes says, there's crooked things everywhere, and we're going to get upset every time there's something crooked. We're going to be one angry, messed up person. So it's just not the way that we're to handle this. We need to promote health among each other and among others. So diffusing the situation, again, it just comes back to that over and again. I'm trying to do the best I can, talk more calmly, cool the conversation down. When somebody raises their voice, lower your voice. Speak more softly. I've found a lot of times, go ahead, Jay. Yeah.
That's a fun story. Alice and I were dating, and there was something that happened, and she was heightened about it, and I was trying to calm things down. She thought I wasn't giving it enough value, so she was getting more upset. And I'm like, oh, she's really upset. I need to really calm down. And we just kept doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the kinds of things that get in the way sometimes, Ken.
Sometimes these can be done to counteract too, like slanders or defamation. It's like a sword and it wounds a person indefinitely, forever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Just that. It doesn't have to be face to face. It can be,
No.
If somebody says something behind your back and they spread it around,
Right. Yeah, and hearing it, actually, sometimes hearing it through the grapevine and getting back to you, someone saying these tough things and it getting back to you hurts worse than if they just talked to you about it and said how they felt. and as many have said, what in the world happens when a person gets on Facebook or one of the other social medias and somehow thinks that it's perfectly okay to say horrible things that you would never have said if you were standing there face to face with the person. It's really, really, really dangerous kind of activity. Unfortunately, a lot I've read recently on this social media activity that we have a lot of people who've lost the ability to actually have reasonable conversations face to face because they're not used to doing it. They're just used to doing it through online, and they feel like they have a freedom to say as they please, whereas face to face they don't know how to talk, they don't know how to relate, they don't know how to have good relationships and friendships. So that's another whole nother danger that comes along to being able to work together and have good relationships. That takes practice. It takes years and takes practice, it takes self-control. There's a lot to having a good relationship with another person. It does not come through social media. That's not a relationship. Those are not friends. I don't care what Facebook says. Friends are those you relate to person. That other stuff is fake. You just think they are. And I think I get requests all the time. People have no idea who in the world they are, and I think, well, I'm not doing this. It's not that I'm trying to be mean, but I don't know you. I don't know why. I have no idea. I think they just want to make their friend list really long. And since I look at Facebook like once a month or two, only when I think my grandchildren have a picture on there, that's when I go on. All right, Proverbs 22, verse 24 and 25. Chapter 22, verse 24 and 25. Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. What's one big main principle you learn there?
Who your friends are.
Yeah, choose who your friends are. That's right. And why?
It's a learned behavior.
You start learning their ways. Okay? Who were the first best friends you had in your life?
Siblings?
Come on, you go back further than that. Parents?
I'm the fourth kid.
I would hope your mom and dad were your first best friends. Your siblings are going, oh, another rat kid, we got in this family. What are we going to do? Where do we learn a lot of our anger weapons? We learn it from our parents. I certainly did. We learn it from our parents. And whatever anger weapon we relate to, Dad may have one, Mom may have another, and whatever our personality seems to catch on to, and that's the weapon we're going to use. And here's the tough part. We get so used to our parents using, as we're growing up, using their anger weapon, that we don't think there's anything wrong with it. And then when we replicate it, we're shocked when somebody else thinks that we're crass or bad or whatever, because we just got accustomed to it. And that's really, really dangerous. A yeller, for example, can grow up with a mom or a dad that was a yeller. And they think, oh, I hate that yelling. She yells at this level. Now, I don't yell like that. I yell at this level. Well, normal is down here. You just thought you were comparing yourself with somebody else and thought you came down a few notches, and maybe you did, but you're way overboard anyway. You're still yelling. You can yell, by the way, without raising your voice. It's the way you look, and it's the way you say your words. Sure, I love you. You nasty person. There you go. Anger is displayed in so many different ways. I have known people who prided themselves on never, ever having an outburst of wrath, or raising their voice, or anything like that. In fact, I had a couple that I heard a noise outside my office one day when I was in San Diego, and I couldn't believe I ran outside to see what was going on. The man was standing up against the wall, and the woman was slapping him repeatedly in the face and punching him. And my office door was an outside door, so I'm going, get in here. People are walking by. This is a terrible example. Slap him in here if you're gonna slap him. Don't slap him out here. Anyway, I got in there, and he had always prided him. You couldn't get him to lose his temper. He knew exactly where her button was. And he would punch that button when he was angry with her without ever raising his voice. She'd lose it, and he'd sit there and go, see what kind of person you are? You're disgusting. And my first inclination was to rebuke her. My second was to figure out how it started. Yeah, she was doing wrong. But he was really mean by knowing what could trigger her, and then arrogantly act like he was better, as if he didn't have an anger problem. Of course you have an anger problem. You have a serious anger problem. You not only are using your anger, you're doing it in a way that you're causing somebody else to sin, and then happy about it. So be aware. There's lots of different anger problems.
That's the wicked intentions.
There you go, wicked intentions. That's exactly right. And it's really, really amazing to see this. But most importantly here, anger is contagious. You learn it from others, you learn it from parents, and you can replicate it. So it's good to stop and think back. How did my parents use their anger weapon? How am I using a similar thing? What can I do to remedy that? Callie.
Another thing I thought about reading this verse is how often people make friends with other people because they are angry at the same thing.
Excellent point. Yeah. It's fun to be angry together at the same thing. Yeah.
It does. It sets a snare for your soul, because you're never going to be able to
That's right.
not be offended by that
That's
anymore
right.
if you're just reinforcing
Yeah. You remind me of one of the studies I read in the book that I had on anger. I still have it in my library on anger. And there was a huge layoff at a particular company. And so they did a study took the ones who were laid off, and they separated them in two groups and did a study concerning them. One group, they brought in a psychologist who had this group go over and over the hurt they had and the pain they have and the anger they have and talk it out as to how they felt what this company was. The other group, they simply said, go out and find a new job. The psychologist there just urged them to stop looking back, look forward, look at the opportunities before you, like the book is, Who Moved My Cheese? Find some new cheese. Guess which group recovered rapidly? Yeah, not the group who sat in there and stewed in their own juice about it. They became more angry. The group that was encouraged to forget the past, these are things that happen, and move on and find new opportunities, went through this in a very, very healthy way. I thought that was interesting. Sitting around and just stewing on things stirs up more anger. It's not healthy. And again, that comes down to don't let bitterness get in your heart, and that's how that happens. So, as you said, Callie, not real helpful to let's get together and get madder about what's going on. Exactly. Proverbs 25:23. North wind brings rain, and a backbiting tongue, and angry countenance. Or ESV says the north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting or gossiping, New American Standard, tongue, angry looks. Okay? So a backbiting tongue, bringing forth angry countenance, just like the north wind brings rain. What's the analogy?
We need to frown upon people who do that.
Yeah.
We need to give them an angry, reprove them by the very way that we look at them.
Good. Yeah, this the north wind and the backbiting tongue do the same thing. Around here, I learned this in Abilene, Texas. When a norther comes through, look out, man. That front's coming down from up there in South Dakota and all that kind of stuff, and Idaho, and it'll really whack you. And here, when in the wintertime, when it's coming from the north, what are we expecting? We're expecting a storm. We're expecting rain. That's what happens. Well, here, backbiting tongue is a guarantee of bringing about angry looks.
Say we learn a lot from cows. When the wind's blowing and it's raining, they're facing the other way. And that's the way you do with a backbiting tongue. You turn around, you just say, I don't want to hear.
Yeah. Good to get away from that. Let's quickly go on the next one. Verse 27, verse 3. 27:3. A stone is heavy and sand is weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than both of them. What's the message?
Dealing with a fool's anger is burdensome, presses on you and it crushes you. It's always unreasonable and unjustified.
Yeah. Everybody knows how difficult it is to carry a heavy rock or a heavy sack of sand. And he's saying wrath, a person's wrath on you, or provocation, especially when it's out of control and unreasonable, unmerciful, is far greater than any physical burden. Okay?
When I first read that, I took it as the fool's carrying the burden.
As what?
As the fool who's carrying the burden.
Fools carrying a burden. Okay?
The burden of wrath.
Yeah. Yeah, then that's true too. You're carrying if you're a wrathful person, you are carrying a great burden. I think of that oftentimes when I see a person who just seems to be always angry about something. I think, man, they've got to have some kind of heavy burden that they're carrying to just let things overcome them that way.
I read this as having a double or an emphasis on this. It's one thing to deal with a fool, It's another thing to deal with someone who's angry, but if you're dealing with a
Fool,
angry fool, it's weightier than
Yes.
the opposite end.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to deal with. You can't reason with a fool.
Yeah.
It's hard to reason with the angry. You got an angry fool.
You got a double whammy. That's good point. Yeah, you put both of them together. It's one thing just dealing with an angry person, but an angry fool is totally unreasonable. You can't have a discussion with exactly. Great point. 27 verse 4, right after that. Wrath is cruel and anger a torrent, but who is able to stand before jealousy? That's interesting. What's worse in this text, the anger or the jealousy? The jealousy is. Why? Why is the jealousy more difficult to deal with than anger?
We want revenge.
Pardon?
There's a desire for revenge there. For one thing, they're going to do some injury of some sort.
All right. Yeah, jealousy is something that just builds. Anger typically diffuses after a while. The emotion eventually goes away or something like that. But jealousy, you can't appease it. In fact, in Proverbs 6:34 and 35, speaking of the husband who had another man cheat with his wife, the scripture says, "For jealousy is a husband's fury, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased, though you give him many gifts." You're not going to be able to appease that guy. Whereas somebody with anger, you might be able to do better. So the idea of the jealousy even being worse than that.
Jealousy seems like it's more covert,
More what?
hidden.
Yes, more hidden, not as obvious. Be something that deep rooted, that a person is going to find his opportunity. You see that in 2 Samuel with Absalom murdering Amnon, his brother, after he defiled Tamar. And so you see a lot of those kinds of things. Quickly, one final one, Proverbs 19:18 and 19. "Chasten your son while there's hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. A man of great wrath will suffer punishment, for if you rescue him, you will have to do it again." Here is this short window of hope that you have with a child, in which you must not be a willing party to his or her death. Don't set your heart on destruction. Discipline while there is hope. This is one of the most violated things that goes on today, allowing a child to never have consequences. And like he says in the last part of that, a hot-headed person must pay the penalty, rescue them, and you will have to do it again. That's the ESV version. Rescue the hot-headed person and not let them pay the penalty of their foolishness, and you'll have to do it again. Okay? Good point for parents. You let your children suffer the consequences of foolish actions. You make sure they suffer the consequences of foolish actions. Otherwise, they grow up never thinking they should have to suffer consequences for foolish actions. All right, a lot more in that, a few more in that section that you can go over. There are a lot more in that section that you go over. Next week, we'll look at the good and bad of the tongue. So become right and hand in glove with this same picture. Thanks for your good comments.